Letting go of someone who has hurt you is one of the most painful and paradoxical experiences the human heart can endure. Not because you don't recognize the damage they've caused, not because you don't understand on a rational level that walking away is the only path to healing, but because deep down inside, you buried under layers of emotional confusion and unconscious attachment, there exists a bond that transcends logic. Okay, bond forged not merely by shared memories or romantic illusions, but by the inner workings of the psyche itself. Carl Jung, the Swiss psychoanalyst who revolutionized our understanding of the unconscious mind, believed that relationships are not simply emotional experiences shared between two autonomous individuals, but rather psychological mirrors and attunement connections that awaken and reflect the most hidden, repressed, and denied aspects of ourselves, and in doing so, hold up a mirror to the parts of our soul we have not yet dared to face. And so, when you find yourself entangled with someone who consistently causes you pain, whether through neglect, betrayal, manipulation, or cold indifference, the real struggle is not just in separating from them physically, but in disentangling your emotional reality from the projection your unconscious has woven around their image. An image that often has little to do with who they truly are, and everything to do with what your inner self still yearns to heal, validate, or recover. You may think you're holding on to the person because of love, but in truth, what you're often clinging to is the hope that this time, maybe this time, you will be seen, chosen, rescued, or healed, because part of you still believes that if they finally love you the way you need to be loved, the wounds you carry will no longer ache, and the ghosts of your past will finally rest. Jung would tell you that what you call love is sometimes your shadow, your unconscious pain, shame, fear, and longing projected onto another person in a desperate hope that they will complete what was left unfinished within you. And as long as that projection remains unexamined, you will return again and again to the same type of person, the same emotional cycle, the same breaking point. Because the psyche is not interested in comfort, it is interested in wholeness. And that is where the pain of letting go becomes more than just grief. It becomes transformation. Because to truly let go of someone who hurt you, you must first understand why you held on in the first place. And to do that, you must descend into the depths of your own psyche, where all the stories of your life, your childhood wounds, your unmet needs, your inherited beliefs, your fears of abandonment, your desire to be worthy are quietly dictating your patterns in love. And once you begin to see this clearly, with brutal and unflinching honesty, you can no longer pretend that it was only about them. Letting go, then, is not just an act of walking away. It is an act of inner confrontation, a courageous willingness to face the parts of yourself that have confused attachment with affection, Cain with passion, because until you do, every step you take away from the 2AT you take away from the person will still feel like a step away from a part of yourself, and that is why it hurts so much. And that is why you keep going back. Jung wrote that until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And perhaps there is no clearer evidence of this truth than in the repetition of toxic relationships, where we find ourselves magnetically drawn to people who resembled the very dynamics we swore to escape. Because even when they hurt us, they feel familiar, and in that familiarity, our unconscious senses a chance not for love, but for recognition. But what your inner child wants to be loved perfectly, to be chosen unconditionally, to be understood. Without words, no partner can ever provide in full, especially not the ones who reopen your wounds instead of helping you heal them. And so, you must come to terms with the heartbreaking yet liberating truth that what you needed from them must now be given to yourself. And this is where the path of individuation begins, the sacred Jungian process of becoming whole, of integrating the fractured parts of the self, of facing the shadow, not to destroy it, but to understand it. because it is only through that understanding that transformation is possible. And only through transformation that letting go becomes not an act of time, loss, but a reclaiming of power to let go of someone who hurt you. You must stop asking why they couldn't love you the way you needed and start asking why you believed you had to stay to be loved at all. You must begin to peel back the layers of your conditioning. The belief that your worth depends on someone else's attention. The idea that love must hurt to be real. The silent agreement you made long ago that you must earn love by enduring suffering, and in doing so, you begin to dissolve the inner architecture that kept you tethered to pain under the illusion of connection. You cannot free yourself from someone externally if you are still emotionally dependent on them for meaning, identity, or validation. And that is why the work of letting go must happen internally, first by grieving, not just a person, but the version of yourself that believed you needed them to feel whole. Jung taught that true healing is not found in denial or suppression, but in conscious integration. And that means you must allow yourself to feel the grief, the anger, the longing, its confusion, not to wallow in it, but to witness it, to honor it, to understand that every wave of emotion is not a sign of failure, but a sign that your soul is trying to heal from years of disconnection and disempowerment. And in time, you remain brave if you continue to walk the inner path with honesty and compassion. You'll begin to feel something shift, something subtle, like the loosening of a knot, the exhale of a held breath, the slow but certain return of your own presence, and in that presence, you'll realize that you are no longer waiting for them to come back, because you have begun to come back to yourself. This return to self is not a final destination, but a lifelong journey, a commitment to stop abandoning yourself for the sake of others, to stop making excuses for those who can't meet you in your depth, to stop shrinking your light so someone else doesn't feel threatened. And in that decision, you begin to rewire the very foundations of your emotional life. It is not enough to leave the relationship. You must leave the internal dynamic that kept you bonded to it, and that requires an ongoing commitment to radical self-honesty, emotional maturity, and spiritual depth. The kind of inner work that Jung believed was the only path to real freedom, not freedom from pain, but freedom from unconscious repetition. Letting go of someone who hurts you is not about proving that you are stronger than the pain, or showing the world that you can move on without them. It's about reclaiming the sacred responsibility of your own soul, which has waited patiently for you to return and finally listen to what it has been trying to tell you all along. It is about recognizing that love in its truest form is never about possession, control, or sacrifice. It's about presence, authenticity, and mutual respect. And when those are absent, what remains may be familiar, but it is not love. It's the echo of your own unmet needs bouncing off someone else's walls. And so, as painful as it may be, the moment you stop looking at them as the answer to your longing, and start seeing them as the catalyst for your awakening, you begin to shift out of victimhood and into empowerment. And that is where real healing begins, not in the forgetting, but in the remembering of who you are. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And this is the final truth about letting go. It is not an act of forgetting or erasing the past, but of bringing light into the darkest corners of your soul, where the wounds became patterns and the patterns became chains. It is in this light that you begin to see the truth, not the fantasy you once clung to, not the illusion that kept you hoping, but the reality that you were always worthy, always whole, always enough, and that the pain was not a punishment, but a call to rise, to awaken, to come home. So if you're standing at the edge of goodbye, heart trembling, soul aching, unsure of whether you have the strength to walk away from someone who cannot meet you where you need to be met, remember this: The most courageous thing you can do is not to wait for them to change, but to choose yourself even when it hurts, even when it's lonely, even when it feels like loss, because in choosing yourself, you are no longer abandoning the one person who has always needed your love the most, you. And that is how you begin to let go, not by force, not by pretending, not by erasing your feelings, but by allowing the pain to teach you, to shape you, to deepen you until one day you wake up not with a heart full of ache, but with a quiet sense of peace, because you finally understood letting go of someone who hurt you is not the end of love, it is the beginning of truth. And when that moment arrives quietly, not with fanfare, but with a strange stillness, you will come to understand that the most profound form of healing does not erupt subtly from grand gestures or dramatic acts of closure, but rather unfolds gently in the silent spaces you create within yourself, spaces where you are no longer driven by the desperate need to be seen by someone else. Because you have finally begun to see yourself, you will notice, perhaps unexpectedly, that the memories that once ignited storms inside your chest now pass through you like softened waves, no longer crashing with the urgency of unprocessed emotion, but rolling in and out of your awareness like old stories you've already read, no longer needing to be rewritten or redeemed, because you've finally accepted that some chapters end without resolution and some people exit without apology. In this new landscape of inner clarity where you have surrendered the need to make sense of another person's chaos or convince them to acknowledge your worth, you will find yourself reconnecting with the quieter, forgotten parts of your being, the parts that once dreamed freely, trusted openly, and moved through the world, not with guarded hesitation, but with the soft, fierce bravery of someone who has nothing to prove and everything to feel. Carl Jung believed that we are not here to be perfect, but to be whole, and wholeness is not the absence of pain or the erasure of history, but the inclusion of all that. We are all that we've lived through and all that we've discovered about ourselves in the crucible of suffering, especially the kind inflicted by those who promised love but delivered wounds. And so you begin to see the person who hurt you, not as a villain to be punished or a mystery to be solved, but as a symbolic figure, a psychological archetype sent into your life not to validate your worth, but to expose where you have abandoned it, where you still cling to the idea that love must be earned through endurance, and where your spirit still believes that breaking yourself for someone else's comfort is what it means to be loyal. But love is not suffering. Loyalty is not submission. In your heart, though bruised, was not made to be held hostage by someone else's inability to meet you with care. And once this truth lands, not just in your intellect, but in your nervous system, in your breath, in the way your shoulders finally relax, you will understand what letting go truly means. It means releasing not only the person, but the pattern. It means walking away not only from the relationship, but from the old narrative that told you love was something to chase, to beg for, or to prove yourself worthy of. It means standing in the full presence of your own pain without flinching, not to glorify your suffering, but to bear witness to the resilience that carried you through it. And to recognize that this very capacity to feel deeply is not your weakness, but your gift. You were not too much. You were not too sensitive. You were simply attuned to energies that others had long shut down within themselves. And in that attunement, became a mirror for their discomfort, their fears, their unspoken truths, and in their inability to hold that reflection, they lashed out, withdrew, or caused harm, not necessarily because they were evil, but because they were unequipped to face their own shadows. And while that may offer explanation, it does not require justifications, because understanding why someone hurt you does not mean you must continue allowing it. Jung once wrote that what you resist persists, and the same is true for emotional entanglement. The more you resist grieving, the more you resist feeling, the more you resist the full truth of what this relationship revealed, the longer it will haunt you. Not as an active presence, but as a silent undercurrent shaping your choices, your trust, your openness, your capacity to connect dot. Therefore, letting go is not about forgetting, nor is it about pretending that what happened didn't matter. Letting go is the sacred act of stepping out of illusion and into reality, of allowing yourself to feel the full heartbreak of knowing that someone you loved could not meet you in that same love, and yet refusing to let that heartbreak become the definition of your self-worth. It is allowing your boundaries to become stronger, not as walls that shut everyone out, but as wise, living membranes that filter who and what you allow into the intimate spaces of your life. And that wisdom does not come from bitterness, but from clarity, from integration, from the deep knowing that you deserve not just love, but love that nourishes, sustains, and honors who you truly are. And perhaps most importantly, it is knowing that the work does not end when they are gone, because healing is not a straight line. Closure is not a gift others give. It is the door you build with your own hands, out of tears and insights and sleepless nights. Until one day, you realize that the door is no longer just something you close behind you, but something that opens forward into a new version of yourself, one that no longer confuses pain with love or silence with safety in Jungian terms. You are stepping out of the complex, the unconscious structure that formed around a central, wound into consciousness, into self-possession, into a place where you no longer seek in others what you now know how to offer to yourself. And that is the final liberation, not in replacing the person, not in rushing into someone new, but in reclaiming all the pieces of yourself you once gave away in hopes of being chosen. Because now, you choose you, not out of ego, but out of reverence, not out of pride, but out of wisdom, not out of fear, but out of the quiet, unshakable truth that your healing is not anyone else's responsibility, but your sacred path. Then that path, as Jung reminds us, is not easy, but it is yours. Yours to walk, yours to shape, yours to transform. And in that walking, in that slow, patient return to yourself, you will discover the greatest truth of all, that what once felt like the end of love was actually the beginning of freedom.